Radio today, it's happening.
Right, the Turbo King in South Africa is no doubt is Chris Camburis. He's got every franchise to do with turbos. The company's called TurboDirect. And Chris, what turbocharged companies do you represent here?
Roger, we represent basically all of the brands, all of the original brands, the OEM manufacturers who make the turbochargers for the OEMs first fit to the vehicles, which will include Garrett, Borg-Warner, IHI, Mitsubishi, and Holset.
So that's basically the whole world. Actually, that's every worthwhile turbo company in the world. Listen, and the type of brands that would fit any one of these turbos would be companies, motorcar companies like which?
Alpha to Zonda. Simple as that.
So we're not going to get the names out here, but because turbocharging over the years, from being the time delay that you had when you put foot, that's all gone. Big power motors, small engines that produce a lot of power. With economy, there's not that lag that you used to have. It's all very sorted out. And if you've got a normal car, and you want to just get extra power, turbo's the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the trend in the market at the moment, it's emissions driven. So you'll find that government legislation will say engine manufacturers have got to lower their carbon footprint year by year, year after year, and there's a certain amount that they've got to lower it by. The easiest way to do that is decrease the size of the engine. But the inherent problem by decreasing the size of the engine is losing the horsepower. So obviously, turbocharging will gain the horsepower back. It runs at much higher temperatures, especially the Euro 6 setups, and that also helps burn off some of the emissions. There's a lot of new technology which will prevent those engines from having lag. You've got ball bearing turbochargers, you've got bi-turbochargers, in other words, twin turbos. You've got parallel sequential, you've got serial turbochargers, you've got dual boost turbochargers, and a lot more. They've incorporated a lot of electronics and electronic controls in terms of how they manage and how they ramp up the boost, and it's really another world. There's no more turbo lag like you used to have in the old days.
But you just put a turbo on the side of an engine, connected to the exhaust, and you had turbocharging. But it's, as you say, it's got electronic, it's got all the various types. It's a whole system. Mind you, it was used, let's face it, in diesel engines and aircraft engines well before the last World War, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at aircraft, for example, they ran very, very low compression. And obviously they turbocharge those engines. And the reason they do that is because the higher you fly, the less oxygen there is, the higher the altitude density becomes, and obviously there you need a turbocharger just to equalize so that when you're flying at altitude you have the same power as if you were on the ground. Now let's compare driving a car in Durban and driving a car at the Reef in Joburg. There's an obvious power loss because of the altitude, and that obviously happens in aircraft as well. But another thing that also brings counters the lag in most of the cars is the common rail direct injection. That allows you to run a much higher engine compression ratio and still turbocharge without breaking the engine, and obviously that also helps overcome lag.
Yeah. Listen, I remember it was John Conchi, long time ago. Remember John? He was fitting turbos. I was with Alpha, and they fitted a turbo to an Alpha GTV. And I brought it up from Pinetown up to Joburg. Anything has been stopped a robot, just found the paint on the top of the bonnet started to melt, which I thought must have been quite high temperatures of turbos. Those were early days. That's all gone.
Yeah, John Conchi from Alpine Turbo, yes, I remember him. We knew each other. Those turbochargers that he used to use were Mitsubishi in the old days, yeah. So there was an article in the car magazine a while back, a 325 IS in those days, and he turbocharged one of them. Something very, very popular was the Alpha GTVs, the 2.5 and the 3 liters, and then he did a lot of other cars as well. But in those days, you didn't have what we have today in terms of Euro 2, Euro 3, Euro 4, etc. Those are your emission type regulated engines. We didn't have emission control at all during the time that John Conchi was still turbocharging those vehicles, and the temperatures from the latest Euro 6 setups are 1,050 degrees exhaust gas temperatures, EGTs, and that's a fact. That is a normal operating temperature for any day-to-day driving gasoline-driven passenger vehicle. Now, in those days, if it was melting the paint off the bonnet, you weren't even seeing 600 degrees Celsius in terms of EGTs.
It was bad paint, really.
No, I think it's also placement of the turbochargers, lack of heat shields, things like that. Things have changed, and they've developed a lot over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it's so nice. I mean, you go from the coast. You could feel it when you used to fly down to Durban, hire a car. You could say, gee, this car's got, if you drove a similar car, you thought, gee, this car's got power. That doesn't matter anymore. Come from Durban, come to Joburg, they all perform the same, basically.
Yeah, absolutely, they do. You've got barometric pressure sensors and all this compensation built into the ECUs these days. So regardless of whether you're driving the same turbocharged car at the coast or in the reef, you're going to have the same sort of response, and everything's going to feel basically the same.
But you can hear, we're talking to Chris Camburis, he heads up, he's the MD of TurboDirect in South Africa, and really is the turbo kick. You can hear the knowledge and the passion that he has for the product. He founded the company. Now, a new one too, you gave us just now, Mitsubishi and Borg Warner and Garrett. The two that I always knew was Borg Warner and Garrett, and Mitsubishi is big now too, is now you've got a new one in, I hadn't heard of these before, from Japan, IHI, EMEO Turbo. So that's a new one too. And unbeknown to me, certainly, that they fitted them to a lot of Japanese cars anyway, from Japan. And Japan is fitting turbos these days. And so's Korea.
Yeah, no, 100%. IHI EMEA is a Japanese manufacturer. EMEA stands for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So it's the channel that we basically purchase and we get supplied our turbochargers from. It is a genuine brand, and this is the company in Japan that manufactures turbochargers for Golf 7 GTI, Golf 7R, some of the BMWs, some of the other smaller size engines in the VW range, the 1800 TFSIs, 1400s, 1200s, and you'll find a lot of the Japanese cars, like for example your GTRs, your R35s, the standard turbochargers on those vehicles are made by IHI. And then you'll find a lot of heavy duty off-highway machinery, earth moving, mining, will have the IHI brand on them as well. For example, Hitachi, the Isuzu engines, or any machine that uses an Isuzu engine, for example, and then Hyundai as well. So it's a really large company. It is an OEM manufacturer, and they've got some serious technology. Formula One cars run IHI turbochargers. Le Mans 24-hour cars are running IHI. British touring cars, some of the vehicles, depending on the model of the vehicle, run IHI. So they're very well known, and they're not a small company by no means.
When you talk TurboDirect here, are you just talking motor cars, or are you talking a full range of products, buses, tractors, whatever, earth moving? You do everything with just the cars?
We do absolutely everything. So from passenger vehicle, PV, commercial vehicle, what we term CV, on-highway, off-highway, mining, agriculture, marine, genset, stationary engine, you name it, we do it.
Now, does IHI only do turbos, or they also do superchargers as well? Because there's a different, you can tell us the difference between turbos and superchargers. I'm sure you know what it is, Chris.
Yeah, I know a little bit about turbos, and I learned a little bit about superchargers too. IHI do manufacture superchargers. The difference between a supercharger and a turbocharger is really, really simple. A supercharger is an engine parasite, and a turbocharger is not. Now, what we mean by that is it's not an insult. It is pretty much explaining how the supercharger generates its power. It uses power from the engine in order to be able to drive itself to then obviously increase the flow capacity to produce extra power. So let's take an example. Let's say you have an engine which is able to make 300 horsepower, and you want to boost that to 450 horsepower. You have a supercharger that can boost the power by 150 horsepower, but you only get 400 horsepower out of the engine because the supercharger itself consumes 50 of the 150 horsepower. So
mechanically driven.
It's mechanically driven, and that's why we call it an engine parasite, because it uses some of the engine, or uses some of the power from the engine to drive the supercharger.
Here's the thing. I remember we saw they came out a year or two ago, ERAs, and what was nice about a supercharger, you could hear the whine of that. It added to the excitement of the noise of the car. It was 1.5 litre. And suddenly they all went like rockets, because I don't think modern Grand Prix cars are much faster than the ones of 30, 40 years ago, with all the electronics and everything, because those cars, when they had superchargers on, I mean, Ferraris and those things, they all went like rockets, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at how a supercharger works as well, the faster you turn the supercharger, the more boost it makes. Yeah. And because it's connected mechanically to the drivetrain of the actual engine, the faster the engine runs, the faster the supercharger runs, the faster the supercharger runs, the more boost it produces. So, the whine that you mentioned, Rogers, is purely how the supercharger is actually driven. So you'll get a centrifugal supercharger, which is basically a supercharger driven through a gearbox, and that is why you're hearing a whine. And also you get what we call a screw-type supercharger, which is a totally different design, also driven mechanically, and it also has a bit of a whine to it as well. That's the mechanical noise and the mechanical gearing that you're basically hearing over and above the engine sound.
We're talking to Chris Camburis. You can hear he knows a thing about superchargers and turbochargers. I've got to say, Chris, just start your Game Boy and you're on your way as far as it all goes. But listen, now, in the car world, people say automatics, this, that, and the other, but 45% of the cars made in the world have gone to automatic gearboxes. Now, what's turbos? We drive quite a lot of these small engine cars. And you've got to actually think, I wonder if it's got a turbo, because you just accept they're under the bonnet working away and producing the power. What sort of percentage of cars, if there is a figure made today, are using turbos for all the advantages they got with economy and keeping the same power altitude or whatever?
I think that those figures change all the time, Roger. What we find is the turbocharger manufacturers can give us data. They don't really share the actual figures in terms of percentage of normally aspirated engines manufactured today and turbocharged engines, gasoline-driven passenger vehicle I'm talking about. Yeah. But what we do see is we see between 40 and 50 new part numbers coming out every single month from the combination of all the turbo manufacturers that we represent. So there's a huge influx of new turbochargers that we need to put on the shelf for vehicles that previously were not turbocharged. So it's a massive industry, and we know for a fact that the turbocharger industry, or the turbocharger automotive product, is the only automotive product with future growth. Now, what we mean by that is every car already has 4 wheel bearings. Every car has a hooter. Every car has an alternator. Every car has a starter motor. There's no future growth. We're not talking about increased sales. We're talking about actual growth. So if you look at a piston manufacturer, they are losing market share because the engines are becoming downsized. So from V8s to V6s, 6s to 5s, 5s to 4s, and now we're getting 3-cylinder engines coming out. But you find where there's future growth on the turbocharger side and related components, intercoolers, PCV valves, EGR valves, etc., there's future growth because there are a lot of normally aspirated engines that never previously had a turbocharger. So this product is a very exciting product with absolute massive growth. It's the most exciting automotive product to be involved with today.
I must say, when you get in a car and you drive with a turbo, it is, let's face it, the change in performance, all the other things that go with it. And the cars are manufactured originally with turbos. The characteristics are just great to drive. Again, if people want to get hold of TurboDirect, how they get hold of you?
Very easy. You can jump onto Google and Google TurboDirect, and you will find us. You can go to www.turbodirect.co.za, and we're on Facebook as well. So do a little bit of searching, and you'll find us. We're in the face of the public. So anything to do with turbochargers, you'll see us come up.
That was Chris Camburis. You can hear the knowledge that he has, and really the increase in business has been fantastic. He basically has all the turbos. Any recognizable turbo he distributes here in South Africa. We're very fortunate to have in South Africa. Actually, you can service your car and also service all the OEMs that are fitting turbos to their cars. Thanks very much, Chris.
Absolute pleasure, Roger. Nice to see you again.
Join our Facebook group and interact with us. Search Radio Today Johannesburg on Facebook.